Captain Elena Vasquez watched through the observation deck as the massive alien ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, like silver tears falling from heaven. The Kethmori had arrived exactly as promised, their crystalline vessels catching the dying light of what might be humanity's last sunset. The plague had taken 90% of Earth's population in just 18 months. The Crimson Death, scientists called it, though Elena preferred the simpler term the children used, the Red Sleep. Once infected, victims would develop scarlet patches on their skin before falling into a deep slumber from which they never woke. No human medicine could touch it. No quarantine could contain it. The virus seemed to understand human biology better than humans themselves. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching as the lead Kethmori vessel settled onto the landing platform they had hastily constructed outside Geneva. The remaining world leaders had argued for weeks about whether to accept alien help, but desperation had a way of making decisions simple. When extinction stared you in the face, pride became a luxury humanity could no longer afford. The Kethmori emerged from their ships like living liquid metal, their forms shifting and flowing as they adapted to Earth's gravity. Their leader, who had introduced himself through radio transmissions as Architect Zethkai, stood nearly 3 meters tall and radiated an aura of ancient wisdom. His voice, when it came through the translation devices, carried harmonics that seemed to vibrate in Elena's bones. "Humans of Earth," Zethkai announced to the assembled representatives, "we have witnessed your struggle against the plague that consumes your species. We offer our aid freely, as is the way of the Kethmori. We ask for nothing in return but your gratitude and the knowledge that life continues." The cure they provided was miraculous in its simplicity. A silver liquid administered through injection, it swept through infected bodies like cleansing fire, burning away the plague while leaving healthy tissue untouched. Within hours of the first treatments, people were awakening from their red sleep, confused but alive. Within days, the pandemic that had brought humanity to its knees was nothing more than a terrible memory. Elena had been among the first to receive the cure, her body racked with fever as the silver medicine fought the infection that had been slowly killing her for weeks. She remembered the moment the fever broke, the incredible lightness that filled her as the weight of impending death lifted from her shoulders. The Kethmori had given her life back to her, given all of humanity a second chance. The aliens stayed for 3 months, helping to rebuild critical infrastructure and sharing knowledge that advanced human technology by decades. They taught humanity how to purify water more efficiently, how to grow crops in contaminated soil, and how to generate clean energy from quantum fluctuations. They were patient teachers, never condescending, always willing to explain complex concepts in terms humans could understand. When the time came for them to leave, billions of humans gathered to watch their departure. Children held signs thanking their saviors. Adults wept openly. Elena stood among the crowd in Geneva, feeling a deep sadness at their departure, mixed with overwhelming gratitude for what they had done. "We go now to aid others who suffer as you have suffered," Zethkai explained during the farewell ceremony. "But know that the Kethmori do not forget those we have helped. One day, when you have grown strong again, we may call upon you for assistance in return. This is the way of the cosmos. Aid freely given, aid freely returned when the time is right." Elena had nodded along with everyone else, thinking it a fair arrangement. How could humanity refuse to help those who had saved them from extinction? The Kethmori departed that evening, their ships rising into the star-filled sky like silver dreams returning to the heavens. Earth was left to heal and rebuild, forever changed by the encounter. In the years that followed, Elena often found herself looking up at the night sky, wondering where their saviors had gone and who else they might be helping. The thought that the Kethmori were out there, spreading hope and healing throughout the galaxy, filled her with warmth. Humanity had been chosen, had been deemed worthy of salvation by beings far more advanced than themselves. She never imagined that salvation could come with a price that would threaten everything they had worked to rebuild. She never considered that the gratitude humanity felt so deeply might one day be weaponized against them. The Kethmori had seemed so benevolent, so genuinely concerned with preserving life throughout the universe. But as Elena would learn in the years to come, even the most genuine kindness could mask intentions that were far more complex than they appeared. The cure that had saved humanity was indeed miraculous, but miracles, she would discover, always came with strings attached. The silver liquid that had purged the plague from human bodies had left behind something else entirely, something that lay dormant, waiting for the right signal to activate. The debt humanity owed would come due eventually, and when it did, Elena would find herself at the center of a crisis that made the original plague look like a minor inconvenience. The saviors who had rescued humanity from extinction would return, and their price for salvation would threaten to destroy everything humanity had built in the decades since their departure. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of humanity's newest space station, Sanctuary Prime, watching the holographic displays show the thriving colonies that now dotted the solar system. 20 years had passed since the Kethmori departure, and humanity had used their gifts well. Mars hosted 3 million colonists, the asteroid belt buzzed with mining operations, and even the harsh moons of Jupiter had been transformed into research stations studying exotic physics. The quantum energy generators the Kethmori had taught them to build powered cities that gleamed like jewels against the void. The agricultural techniques had turned Earth's recovering biosphere into a garden world that fed not just the home planet, but every human settlement in the system. Children born after the plague knew of the Crimson Death only through history lessons. Growing up in a golden age of human expansion and discovery, Elena's daughter, Dr. Sarah Vasquez, worked in the bioresearch division on Luna, studying the long-term effects of the Kethmori cure. Sarah had been 5 when the aliens arrived, young enough to remember their silver forms but old enough to understand that they had saved her mother's life. Now 35 and brilliant in her own right, she led a team investigating why humans seemed to be developing unusual resilience to all forms of disease. The first sign that something was wrong came through the deep space, monitoring arrays that humanity had built to watch for the return of their benefactors. The signals were subtle at first, quantum fluctuations that the automated systems flagged as possibly artificial in origin. Elena had ordered a full analysis, hoping against hope that their saviors were finally coming home. Dr. Marcus Chen, head of the xenobiology department, burst into Elena's office with data tablets clutched in his shaking hands. His usually calm demeanor had cracked, revealing the terror beneath. "Admiral, we need to talk privately. Now." Elena dismissed her staff and sealed the office, activating the white noise generators that would prevent any electronic surveillance. Chen's findings were classified at the highest levels, shared only with a handful of the most trusted officials in human space. "The signals we've been detecting," Chen began, his voice barely above a whisper, "they're not random. They're activation codes, Admiral. The cure the Kethmori gave us, it wasn't just medicine. They left something behind, something that's been dormant in our systems for 2 decades. Elena felt ice forming in her veins as Chen explained his discoveries. Every human who had received the cure carried microscopic devices in their bloodstream, so small and so perfectly integrated with human biology that they had been invisible to all previous scans. The devices were inactive, requiring specific quantum signatures to function, but they were there nonetheless. "What do they do?" Elena asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would be terrible. "We're not entirely sure yet," Chen admitted, "but preliminary analysis suggests they can influence brain chemistry, alter hormone production, and even modify genetic expression in real time. Admiral, these devices could potentially control human behavior on a global scale. Every person who received the cure is carrying them, which means virtually every human alive today." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. The Kethmori hadn't just saved humanity from the plague, they had infected the entire species with something far more insidious. The cure had been a Trojan horse delivering control mechanisms disguised as medicine. For 20 years, humanity had been dancing to music they couldn't hear, guided by puppet strings they couldn't see. Elena immediately ordered expanded analysis of the signals, mobilizing every scientific resource humanity possessed. The quantum signatures were growing stronger each day, building toward some kind of threshold that made her blood run cold. Whatever the Kethmori had planned, it was beginning to activate. Sarah's research on Luna took on new urgency, as she and her team worked around the clock to understand the scope of the alien modifications. They discovered that the devices had been slowly altering human physiology over the decades, making subtle changes that improved immune function and disease resistance. On the surface, these seemed like beneficial modifications, but the implications were chilling. "They've been preparing us for something," Sarah reported during an encrypted conference call. The modifications aren't random. They're systematic, designed to optimize human biology for specific conditions. It's like they've been farming us, Admiral, cultivating us for some purpose we don't understand. Elena found herself staring at her own hands, wondering what alien technology flowed through her veins. Every breath she took, every heartbeat, every thought might be influenced by devices she couldn't detect or remove. The freedom humanity thought they had regained after the plague was an illusion, a carefully maintained pretense while their true masters prepared to collect on their investment. The deep space arrays detected the first Kethmori ship 3 days later, its crystalline hull reflecting starlight as it approached the outer edge of the solar system. More ships followed, a fleet of elegant vessels that moved with purpose toward the inner planets. They weren't rushing, weren't broadcasting any messages of greeting or explanation. They simply came, silent and inevitable as death itself. Elena convened an emergency session of the Solar Defense Council, bringing together the leaders of every human colony and settlement. The discussion was heated, with some arguing for immediate military action while others insisted on diplomatic contact. How do you fight beings who had saved your species? How do you resist saviors who had become your masters? We have to try to communicate with them, argued Governor Martinez from the Mars colonies. Maybe we're misunderstanding their intentions. Maybe the devices have a purpose we haven't considered. The purpose is control, Elena replied grimly. They saved us from the plague so they could use us for something else. The question is what they want, and whether we're strong enough to resist giving it to them. As the Kethmori fleet moved inexorably toward Earth, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's greatest test was yet to come. They had survived extinction once, pulled back from the brink by alien intervention. Now they would have to prove they deserved the freedom they had never truly possessed, fighting not just for their lives but for their right to determine their own destiny. The Kethmori fleet reached Earth's orbit without fanfare, their silver ships taking positions around the planet with mathematical precision. Elena watched from Sanctuary Prime as the vessels arranged themselves in a perfect dodecagon, each one positioned to provide maximum coverage of the planet below. The formation was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a geometric cage that seemed to pulse with barely contained energy. Architect Zethkai's transmission came exactly at midnight GMT, his familiar harmonics now carrying undertones that made Elena's teeth ache. The alien appeared on screens across human space, his liquid metal form more imposing than she remembered, darker somehow, as if the years had tarnished his silver surface. "Children of Earth," he began, and Elena noticed he no longer called them humans. "The time has come for you to fulfill your obligation to those who saved you. The Kethmori have great need, and you possess exactly what we require." Elena activated the response channel from Sanctuary Prime, her heart hammering as she faced the being who had once seemed like humanity's guardian angel. "Architect Zethkai, we welcome your return. However, we've discovered certain modifications in our biology that were not disclosed during your previous visit. We need to understand the nature of the debt you claim we owe." Zethkai's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "Direct as always, Elena Vasquez. You have grown in wisdom since our last meeting. Yes, the cure contained additional elements. They were necessary to prepare your species for the service we require. Consider them improvements to your basic design." "Improvements?" Elena's voice carried 20 years of accumulated authority. "You've placed control devices in every human being without consent. That's not improvement, that's enslavement." "Such crude terms," Zethkai replied, his harmonics shifting to frequencies that made Elena's vision blur. "The devices ensure your survival in the environments where you will serve. They are tools of preservation, not subjugation. The Kethmori do not enslave, we cultivate." The transmission shifted to show images that made Elena's blood freeze. Massive structures floated in the void between stars, their surfaces crawling with figures that looked almost human, but wrong in ways her mind struggled to process. The beings moved with inhuman grace, their eyes reflecting light like mirrors, their skin bearing the telltale silver tracery of extensive Kethmori modification. "These are the Veltar," Zethkai explained. "Once a proud species that resisted the plague, we now call the Crimson Awakening. They chose to accept our aid rather than face extinction. Now they serve the greater purpose, maintaining our deep space installations and preparing worlds for cultivation. They are content in their service, free from the burdens of choice and uncertainty." Elena watched in horror as the Veltar worked with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized as if controlled by a single mind. They had been human once, or something close to it, but the Kethmori had turned them into living tools, their individuality sacrificed for the sake of efficiency. "You want to do the same to us," Elena said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "We want to offer you purpose," Zethkai corrected. "Humanity has proven remarkably adaptable. Your species possesses creativity and resilience that make you ideal candidates for our most challenging projects. We have plans for worlds that require special attention, worlds where the indigenous populations resist our guidance." The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. The Kethmori weren't just collectors of species, they were conquerors, using the beings they saved as weapons against those who refused their help. Humanity wasn't being recruited for construction or maintenance work. They were being conscripted as an invasion force. Dr. Sarah Vasquez's voice crackled over the secure channel from Luna. "Admiral, we're detecting massive energy buildup from the Kethmori vessels. Whatever those devices in our systems are designed to do, I think they're preparing to activate them." Elena could feel it beginning, a strange tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and spread up her arms. Around her, the crew of Sanctuary Prime began to move with unnatural coordination, their eyes taking on a silvery sheen that reflected the overhead lights. The control devices were coming online, preparing to strip away everything that made them human. But something was wrong with the process. Instead of the smooth transition Zethkai clearly expected, humans across the solar system began collapsing, their bodies rejecting the alien programming in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Elena felt the devices in her bloodstream struggling to interface with her nervous system, creating feedback loops that sent shooting pain through her skull. "Impossible." Zethkai's voice carried genuine confusion for the first time. "The integration protocols should be seamless. Your biology has been prepared for decades." Elena smiled through the pain, realizing what Sarah and her team had discovered too late to report. "You made one mistake, Architect. You assumed we'd remain static while you were gone. Humans don't stay the same. We adapt, we evolve, we improve ourselves. 20 years was long enough for us to grow beyond your original modifications." The truth was more complex than Elena let on. Sarah's research had revealed that human biology had indeed been modified by the Cure, but not in the way the Kethmori intended. The devices had been fighting a constant war with human immune systems for 2 decades, and humanity had been winning on a cellular level. Each generation born since the Cure had developed new resistances, new countermeasures that their parents' bodies had learned to create. Children who had never known the plague carried antibodies not just against disease, but against the alien technology itself. Teenagers showed complete immunity to the control protocols. Even adults like Elena, who had received the original Cure, had developed partial resistance through their body's natural adaptation to foreign intrusion. "You've created your own worst enemy," Elena told Zethkai as the failed activation attempt left his fleet vulnerable and confused. "You saved us from extinction, but you also gave us the tools to resist you. Every human alive today carries immunity to your control in their very DNA." The Kethmori ships began to pulse with increasingly aggressive energy patterns as Zethkai realized the scope of his failure. The beings who were supposed to become willing slaves had instead become immune to subjugation. Worse, they now knew the truth about their supposed saviors, and the fate that awaited other species who accepted Kethmori aid. Elena activated the emergency protocols she had hoped never to use, sending coded signals to every human settlement in the solar system. The time for gratitude and diplomacy had ended. The time for resistance had begun, and humanity would fight with everything they had learned from both their saviors and their would-be masters. The first Kethmori attack came without warning, their crystalline ships unleashing beams of coherent energy that carved through Sanctuary Prime's outer hull like a hot knife through butter. Elena felt the station shudder around her as atmosphere rushed out through the growing breaches, emergency bulkheads slamming shut to contain the damage. "All hands to battle stations," she commanded, her voice carrying across every human installation in the solar system. "This is not a drill. We are under attack by hostile alien forces. Defend yourselves by any means necessary." The response was immediate and fierce. Human ships that had been designed for exploration and mining turned their industrial equipment into weapons. Asteroid mining lasers became ship killers. Cargo haulers transformed into assault vessels. The orbital defense platforms around Earth, Mars and Luna opened fire with everything they had, filling space with the brilliant flashes of energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. But the humans had advantages their attackers hadn't anticipated. 20 years of studying Kethmori technology had given them insights into the aliens' capabilities and weaknesses. The quantum energy generators could be overloaded to create devastating explosive devices. The agricultural systems could be weaponized to produce chemical compounds toxic to Kethmori biology. Most importantly, the immune systems that had rejected alien control were now producing antibodies that could neutralize Kethmori biotechnology. Captain Jake Morrison led the defense of the Mars colonies, his converted mining ship dancing between Kethmori vessels like a shark among whales. His crew had jury-rigged their ore processing equipment to project clouds of metallic particles that interfered with alien sensors, creating blind spots where human ships could strike without retaliation. Elena was right, he reported over the tactical channel. These bastards rely too heavily on their technology. Take away their sensors and they fight like they're blind. Dr. Sarah Vasquez coordinated the biological warfare efforts from Luna, where her research team had discovered something remarkable about the failed control attempt. The alien devices that couldn't subjugate human minds could still be influenced by the right electromagnetic frequencies, causing them to malfunction and damage Kethmori systems instead of human ones. We're broadcasting the disruption frequency on all emergency channels, Sarah announced. Any human within range of a Kethmori ship should be able to feed back their control systems. Use your proximity to our advantage. The tide of battle began to turn as human forces adapted faster than their opponents could compensate. Boarding. Parties of immune humans infiltrated Kethmori vessels, their very presence causing alien biotechnology to malfunction and fail. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before found themselves crippled by the touch of beings they had tried and failed to control. Elena watched from Sanctuary Prime's command center as the geometric perfection of the Kethmori formation began to break down. Ships moved erratically as their systems failed, some colliding with each other in their confusion. The silver surfaces that had once seemed so beautiful now appeared tarnished and corrupted, reflecting the chaos of a plan falling apart. Zethkai's image appeared on her screens again, but the architect looked nothing like the benevolent savior who had once offered humanity hope. His liquid metal form writhed with agitation, silver flowing like mercury in a storm. The harmonics of his voice carried frequencies that would have been painful if Elena's modified biology hadn't filtered them out automatically. You do not understand what you are destroying, he raged. The Kethmori bring order to chaos, purpose to meaningless existence. We have guided the evolution of 1,000 species across the galaxy. We have prevented wars, eliminated suffering, created perfect harmony among the stars. By destroying everything that makes a species unique, Elena shot back. By turning living beings into tools for your convenience. You don't guide evolution, you pervert it. And what have you accomplished with your precious freedom? Zethkai's form darkened to the color of old blood. War, suffering, environmental destruction. Within centuries of our departure, you have spread your chaos to every world you touch. We offer salvation from your own destructive nature. Elena smiled grimly as reports flooded in from across the solar system. Human forces were winning not through superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but through the very qualities Zethkai despised: creativity, adaptability, and the stubborn refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. The children of Earth were showing their would-be masters what true strength looked like. Maybe we are chaotic, Elena admitted. Maybe we do make mistakes and fight among ourselves, but those flaws make us strong in ways you'll never understand. We don't just survive, we overcome. We don't just adapt, we improve. And we never, ever stop fighting for our right to choose our own path. The largest Kethmori vessel, Zethkai's flagship, began to withdraw from Earth orbit, its crystalline hull scarred by human weapons and its systems failing under the assault of immune boarding parties. Other ships followed, their perfect formation dissolving into a ragged retreat as the reality of their defeat became undeniable. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. The Kethmori had resources across the galaxy, entire species under their control and technologies that humanity was only beginning to understand. This first battle had been won through surprise and the aliens' overconfidence, but future conflicts would be harder fought and more costly. "Admiral," came a report from the deep space monitoring stations. "We're detecting massive energy signatures from beyond the heliopause. It looks like more Kethmori ships, hundreds of them. This fleet was just the advance force." Elena nodded, having expected as much. The Kethmori wouldn't abandon their investment in humanity easily, and they certainly wouldn't allow word of their true nature to spread to other species. The solar system was about to become the center of a war that would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of free will itself throughout the galaxy. "Send word to every human settlement," she ordered. "Tell them to prepare for siege. We're about to find out if our independence is worth fighting for, because the Kethmori are going to throw everything they have at us." As the defeated fleet limped away from Earth, Elena couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. Humanity had faced extinction before, and survived. They had been betrayed by their saviors and refused to submit. Now they would face the full might of a galactic empire, and Elena had no doubt about the outcome. Humans might not always win, but they never stopped trying, and sometimes that was enough to change the course of history itself. 3 months after the first battle, the solar system had transformed into a fortress. Every asteroid had been hollowed out and converted into a weapons platform. The gas giant's moons bristled with railgun installations and missile batteries. Earth itself was surrounded by a defensive grid that could intercept incoming threats from any direction. Humanity had learned the hard way that survival required constant vigilance. Elena stood in the war room aboard the newly constructed battleship Defiance, studying holographic projections of the approaching Kethmori armada. The enemy fleet was massive beyond anything she had imagined possible, stretching across light years of space like a silver cancer consuming the void between stars. Hundreds of ships, each one capable of devastating entire worlds, moved with inexorable purpose toward humanity's last stronghold. Dr. Sarah Vasquez materialized via quantum communication link from her laboratory on Luna, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with discovery. "Admiral, we've made a breakthrough. The Veltar prisoners we captured from the damaged ships, we've been able to partially reverse their conditioning." Elena leaned forward, hope flickering in her chest. "How partially?" "Enough to communicate. Enough to learn." Sarah's image shifted to show one of the captured aliens, its silvery skin now showing patches of what looked like natural coloration. "Their name was Keith before the modification. They're from a world called Veltarim, and their species was indeed dying from a plague when the Kethmori arrived. The rescued Veltar, who insisted on being called by their original name, rather than the designation their captors had given them, had provided intelligence that changed everything humanity thought they knew about their enemy. The Kethmori weren't an ancient species of benevolent gardeners. They were relatively young, having achieved their current power by consuming the knowledge and abilities of every species they saved. Each species they control adds to their collective capabilities. Keth explained through the translation matrix, their voice carrying harmonics similar to Zethkai's but somehow more musical, more alive. The Kethmori themselves were once a dying race, saved by beings called the Architects of the First Light. But they learned to turn salvation into domination, to make gifts into chains. The revelation sent shockwaves through the human command structure. The enemy they faced wasn't just an empire. It was a collection of enslaved species working under alien control, each one adding their unique abilities to the Kethmori war machine. Worse, many of the controlled species believed they were working for the greater good, their conditioning so complete they couldn't imagine any other existence. Elena realized that winning this war would require more than just defeating the Kethmori. They would need to free every enslaved species, breaking chains that had been forged over millennia. It was a task that seemed impossible, but humans had made careers out of achieving the impossible. "There's something else," Keth continued, their form rippling with what humans had learned to recognize as distress. "The Kethmori have been preparing for your resistance longer than you know. They've been gathering species specifically chosen to counter human advantages. The next wave won't just be ships and energy weapons. As if summoned by Keth's warning, The deep space sensors detected new signatures approaching the solar system. These weren't the elegant crystalline vessels of the Kethmori fleet, but massive organic constructs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The ships looked like they had been grown rather than built, their surfaces covered in what appeared to be living tissue. Shardal biomechanical weapons, Keth identified, their voice filled with ancient fear. They were a peaceful species once, masters of biological engineering. The Kethmori saved them from a genetic plague that was causing their children to be born without consciousness. Now they create living weapons that adapt faster than any technology can counter them. Elena watched the organic ships take positions alongside the Kethmori fleet, their surfaces already beginning to shift and change in response to the defensive preparations they detected around the solar system. These weren't just weapons. They were evolutionary nightmares that could rewrite themselves to overcome any defense humanity might mount. And them? Elena asked, pointing to a third group of vessels that defied easy description. They seemed to exist partially outside normal space, flickering in and out of visibility like mirages made solid. The Zephyrs, Keth whispered, their form trembling, masters of dimensional manipulation. Their homeworld was being consumed by a black hole when the Kethmori arrived with technology to stabilize space-time itself. Now they phase entire fleets through dimensions, appearing inside enemy defenses without warning. Elena felt the weight of hopelessness settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. How could humanity possibly stand against an empire that commanded the combined might of dozens of advanced species? Earth's defenses, impressive as they were, seemed laughably inadequate against forces that could rewrite reality itself. But then she remembered something fundamental about the human spirit. It grew stronger under pressure, more creative when faced with impossible odds. Throughout history, humanity's greatest achievements had come not from comfort and security, but from moments when survival itself hung in the balance. Dr. Chen, she called to the xenobiology specialist, how many other species have we managed to partially reverse the conditioning on? 7 so far, Chen replied, but the process is slow and dangerous. Each species requires different techniques, and failure could kill the subjects. Then we'd better work faster, Elena decided. If the Kethmori want to use enslaved species against us, we'll show them what those species can accomplish when they're free to choose their own path. She activated the general communication system, broadcasting to every human facility in the solar system. All personnel, we are about to face an enemy that commands forces beyond our current ability to comprehend. They have ships that live and breathe, weapons that exist between dimensions, and the combined knowledge of countless enslaved civilizations. The channel was silent for a moment, then filled with voices as humans across the system responded with determination rather than fear. They had faced extinction before and refused to submit. They had been betrayed by their saviors and chosen to fight. Now they would face the impossible once again, and Elena had no doubt they would find a way to make the impossible kneel. But they've made one critical error, Elena continued, her voice carrying across space to reach every human ear. They think we're alone. They think our resistance is limited to one species on one world. They're about to learn that freedom is contagious, and that even the most perfect slave dreams of liberation. We're not just fighting for humanity anymore. We're fighting for every species they've ever controlled. Every world they've ever saved. The approaching armada was vast and terrible, but it carried within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Every enslaved species was a potential ally. Every controlled mind a possible convert to the cause of freedom. The Kethmori had built their empire on the gratitude of the desperate, but they were about to discover that gratitude freely given could be withdrawn just as freely when the truth was revealed. The battle for humanity's freedom began not with weapons fire, but with a transmission that echoed across every frequency known to science. Elena stood in the communication center of defiance, her fingers hovering over the controls that would either save her species or doom them to eternal servitude. Broadcasting on all channels, Dr. Sarah Vasquez confirmed from her position at the quantum transmitter array. The liberation frequency is encoded in 17 different harmonic patterns, targeted at every species signature we've identified in the Kethmori fleet. The message they sent was simple but devastating. It was the testimony of Keth and the other freed aliens, speaking in their own languages about the truth of Kethmori salvation. More importantly, It carried the electromagnetic patterns that Dr. Chen's team had discovered could disrupt alien control devices, giving enslaved minds a chance to remember who they had been before their conditioning. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Across the vast enemy armada, ships began to falter as their crews experienced moments of clarity. The Shardal bioships convulsed as their living components remembered what it felt like to choose their own evolutionary path. Zephyr vessels phased chaotically through dimensions, as their pilots struggled with conflicting programming. Elena watched through the tactical displays as the perfect order of the Kethmori formation dissolved into chaos. Some ships turned their weapons on their companions. Others simply stopped moving, their crews paralyzed by the sudden return of suppressed memories. A few began broadcasting messages of their own, alien voices crying out in languages humanity had never heard but somehow understood as expressions of rage and betrayal. "It's working," Sarah reported, her voice filled with amazement. "The cascade effect is spreading faster than the Kethmori can contain it. Every freed mind is amplifying the signal, creating new disruption patterns that we never could have designed ourselves." But the victory was temporary. Even as thousands of enslaved beings shook off their conditioning, the core Kethmori ships maintained their approach, their crews apparently immune to the liberation frequency. Architect Zethkai's voice cut through the chaos with harmonics that made Elena's bones ache. "Clever children," he acknowledged, his tone carrying grudging respect alongside cold fury. "You have cost us centuries of work with this liberation protocol, but you misunderstand the nature of our empire. The Kethmori do not merely control, we preserve. Every species we guide is saved from the chaos of their own destructive nature." The transmission shifted to show images from across the galaxy. Worlds consumed by war, civilizations that had destroyed themselves through environmental collapse or technological catastrophe, species that had gone extinct, despite having all the knowledge necessary to save themselves. The Kethmori had indeed saved countless races from self-destruction, but at the cost of everything that made them unique. "Without guidance, you will follow the same path," Zethkai continued. "Already your liberation signal spreads discord among species that have known peace for millennia. You offer them freedom to destroy themselves just as you will destroy yourselves given time." Elena activated the response channel, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's collective defiance. "Maybe we will. Maybe we'll make mistakes and fight wars and ruin worlds. But they'll be our mistakes to make, our wars to fight, our worlds to ruin or save as we choose. That's what freedom means, the right to be wrong, to fail, to try again." "Then you have chosen extinction," Zethkai replied. "The Kethmori have weapons you cannot imagine, technologies that existed when your son was young. We will demonstrate the price of defying those who would save you from yourselves." The demonstration came in the form of a weapon that humanity's physicists insisted should be impossible. Space itself began to fold around the solar system, reality warping like heated plastic as the Kethmori attempted to compress the entire system into a single point. Planets shifted in their orbits as the fundamental forces that held the cosmos together began to unravel. But something unexpected happened. The freed aliens throughout the enemy fleet began working together, their combined knowledge creating countermeasures that no single species could have developed alone. Shardal bioships evolved new organs that generated stabilizing fields. Zephyr vessels used their dimensional manipulation to create escape routes through folded space. Other species contributed technologies and techniques that Elena couldn't even name, let alone understand. "They're teaching each other," Dr. Chen observed, his instruments detecting knowledge transfers happening at the speed of thought between the liberated fleets. Without Kethmori conditioning limiting their interactions, they're sharing everything they know. The collective intelligence they're creating exceeds anything the galaxy has ever seen. Elena realized they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a truly free alliance of species working together, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. The Kethmori had inadvertently created the very thing they feared most, a galaxy-spanning civilization based on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced harmony. The space-folding weapon collapsed as the combined efforts of dozens of species neutralized its effects. Reality snapped back to its normal configuration, leaving the Kethmori fleet exposed and vulnerable. But more importantly, it left them outnumbered by their former slaves, who had tasted freedom and found it intoxicating. "This is Captain Vethamar of the former Kethmori vessel Eternal Harmony," came a transmission in accented but understandable English. "We formally request permission to join the human resistance against our former masters. We offer our ships our knowledge, and our lives in service of the freedom you have shown us." Similar messages flooded the communication channels as ship after ship declared independence from Kethmori control. Elena found herself commanding not just humanity's defense fleet, but an impromptu alliance of liberated species that grew larger with each passing hour. "Admiral," Sarah's voice carried excitement and terror in equal measure, "we're detecting quantum signatures from across the galaxy. The liberation signal has reached other Kethmori territories. There are uprisings on dozens of worlds, rebellions spreading faster than light itself." Elena smiled grimly as she realized the true scope of what humanity had unleashed. They hadn't just saved themselves. They had ignited a galactic revolution that would topple an empire built on the enslavement of good intentions. The Kethmori had made their final mistake when they tried to control a species that had learned to turn every gift into a weapon. "All ships, all species," Elena broadcast to the growing fleet of free beings surrounding Earth. "Today we don't just fight for our own freedom. We fight for the right of every thinking being in the galaxy to choose their own path, make their own mistakes, and forge their own destiny among the stars." The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time since the Kethmori had revealed their true nature, Elena believed they could actually win. Not because humanity was stronger or smarter than their enemies, but because freedom was a force that multiplied itself, growing stronger with every being that chose to embrace it, rather than accept the comfortable chains of imposed salvation. The final confrontation took place not in the vacuum of space, but in the quantum realm where thoughts became reality, and will could reshape the fundamental laws of physics. Elena found herself standing on what appeared to be a crystalline plane that extended infinitely in all directions, facing Architect Zethkai in a space that existed between dimensions. "You have destroyed everything we built," Zethkai said, his form now appearing almost transparent, as if the liberation of his empire had somehow diminished his very existence. "Billions of years of careful cultivation, undone by one species that refused to accept salvation." Elena looked around at the strange realm where they had been pulled for this final meeting. She could see the battles raging across the galaxy reflected in the crystalline surface beneath her feet. Freed species fighting alongside humans, Kethmori loyalists making desperate last stands, entire worlds choosing chaos over control. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "You keep using that word," Elena replied, her voice echoing strangely in the quantum space. "Salvation. But saving someone against their will isn't salvation. It's kidnapping. You never asked if we wanted your help. You just decided we needed it and forced it upon us. Because left to your own devices, you would have destroyed yourselves." Zethkai's harmonics reached frequencies that should have been painful, but Elena felt only pity for the being before her. "Do you have any idea how many species we have watched consume themselves in war, pollution, and ignorance? How many civilizations have fallen to their own destructive impulses?" "Probably a lot," Elena acknowledged. "And you know what? Some of them probably deserved to fall. Some of them made choices that led to their own destruction, and that was their right to make. You don't get to decide who lives and who dies based on your idea of what's best for them." Around them, the crystalline plane began to crack as the quantum realm responded to the dissolution of the Kethmori Empire. Each freed world, each liberated mind, sent fractures through the foundation of control that had held the galaxy in stasis for millennia. The cracks spread like wildfire, carrying with them the chaotic energy of genuine freedom. "You speak of rights," Zethkai said, his form flickering between solid and ethereal. "But what right do you have to condemn billions to suffering? The species we guided knew peace, prosperity, purpose. What will they have now? War, famine? The slow decay of civilizations too proud to accept help?" Elena smiled sadly, thinking of all the humans who had died fighting for their independence, all the aliens who had chosen uncertain freedom over guaranteed servitude. "They'll have the right to find out for themselves. They'll have the right to succeed or fail on their own terms. They'll have the right to grow and change and become something neither of us can imagine." The confession came quietly, barely audible above the sound of reality restructuring itself around them. "We were dying too," Zethkai admitted. "The original Kethmori, before we learned to take what we needed from others. Our sun was failing, our world growing cold. The architects of the First Light saved us, gave us technology beyond our understanding, asked for nothing in return. Elena felt a sudden understanding pierce through her anger. But it wasn't enough, was it? Being saved didn't feel like enough. You needed to be the saviors. We were grateful, Zethkai continued, his voice growing weaker as his empire crumbled around him. So grateful that we wanted to share that gift with others. The first species we helped truly did need our aid. They were facing extinction from a solar flare that would have sterilized their world. We moved them to safety, gave them new homes, asked only that they help us save others. The pattern became clear as Elena listened. The Kethmori had begun with genuine altruism, but each act of salvation had required more resources, more coordination, more control. Gradually, they had convinced themselves that forced compliance was acceptable if it served the greater good. The road to tyranny had been paved with the best of intentions. And now, Elena asked as the quantum realm continued to collapse around them. Now we face the same choice we offered others, Zethkai replied. Accept the chaos of freedom or fade into irrelevance. The irony is not lost on us. Elena extended her hand toward the fading architect in gesture that surprised them both. Then choose. Help us build something better than empire. Help us create a galaxy where species can cooperate without coercion, where aid is offered freely and refused just as freely. Help us prove that salvation doesn't require surrender. For a moment, Zethkai's form solidified as he considered the offer. Elena could see the war raging within him, the desire for control warring against the genuine compassion that had started his species down this path. Finally, his harmonics shifted to frequencies she had never heard before, complex and beautiful and somehow sad. We have forgotten how to exist without purpose imposed from above, he said. But perhaps we can learn again. Perhaps there is a middle path between chaos and control. The quantum realm shattered like glass as the last of the Kethmori control networks failed across the galaxy. Elena found herself back aboard Defiance, surrounded by her crew and the representatives of dozens of newly freed species. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Some worlds were indeed descending into chaos as species struggled to govern themselves after millennia of imposed order. Others were thriving in ways the Kethmori had never allowed, developing technologies and cultures that defied their former masters' understanding. A few had reached out to the growing alliance seeking guidance rather than control. What now? Dr. Sarah Vasquez asked, her daughter speaking for billions of beings who suddenly found themselves responsible for their own destinies. Elena looked out at the stars, knowing that humanity had irrevocably changed the course of galactic history. They had destroyed an empire built on forced salvation and replaced it with something far more dangerous and far more wonderful. Genuine freedom, with all its potential for both greatness and catastrophe. Now we learn, Elena said simply. We make mistakes and fix them. We help those who ask for help and respect those who don't. We prove that a galaxy of free beings can accomplish more than any empire ever could, even if it takes us 1,000 years to figure out how. The price of freedom was uncertainty, the constant possibility of failure, the burden of choice without guarantee of outcome. But as Elena watched former slaves and former masters working together to build something unprecedented, she knew it was a price worth paying. The galaxy would never be safe again, but it would be alive in ways it hadn't been for millennia. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the seeds of new civilizations were already beginning to grow, each one free to reach toward the stars in their own unique way. The age of salvation was over. The age of choice had begun.